We will meet again after the day of the reckoning in the United States, and we'd be remiss if I didn't get your take on where we sit right now, Keith. As a reporter, I know you've covered both sides of the border. Both of us have. I would be so bloody frustrated as a journalist assigned to any of these campaigns, whether it was a down ballot campaign or the top of the ballot campaign. I can see it. You can hear it in voices where there is a why the hell am I bothering almost, because the storytelling just seems to be so challenging around good journalism in this particular campaign in the United States.
Well, you can't even phrase a question without, well, you've shown your bias and you're not, you're a Trump dementia, or, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's so difficult to actually get to the actual facts. You've got people that are making shit up all the time, and in front of tens of thousands of people. As you say, as a reporter, I don't know how to sort it out. I'm glad I'm not assigned to cover any of those campaigns. I mean, you look right now, Harris is being held responsible for something Biden said, but Trump is even held responsible for things Trump says. I mean, it's just so far off the beam. So as a voter right now in the United States, looking ahead to next Tuesday, I truly don't know how it comes down. I really think that they're correct. I mean, even though the polls show it's basically, a dead heat within the margin of error or whatever, that Trump performs better than he polls. I think he polls underneath. So I think he's got a real chance of doing this next week, of defeating Harris. Or the other alternative, and this is what I think most of us hope for, that an awful lot of Republicans say, we've just had enough of this crap, and they stay home. And I think that's the best outcome for most of us can see. But if Trump voters go out in numbers, if the Republicans all stay behind him at the ballot box, I think he wins.
Well, John, I was geeking out on the flight to and from Halifax on the weekend, and I was listening to the Economist's podcast.
Right.
And it was two parts on probability models, and I thought, oh my God, this is where we've gone. And I know you and I have talked about this in the past, but they dipped into the history of it, and it's just, for all intents and purposes, it's sport betting that's applied to politics. And when you look at it, you can say the New York Yankees were going to be in the World Series, and it was more likely that the LA Dodgers were going to win the World Series based on all of these factors and, the history of the players and so on. And we try to do that in politics, and it's taking over so much of the oxygen around this. So when people see those probability models, they're equating them with polls. And I wonder where your pollster brain blows up.
Well, I think after doing this for God knows, almost 35 years, I kind of check out on all of that stuff and go to ground. The issue with the American election is, number one, most of the polling that's done at the national level is irrelevant because it comes down to 10 states. And within the 10 states, there's about 5 that matter. And within the 5 that matter, the swing is probably about 1% to 2%. I mean, we're talking about Pennsylvania, that if the Puerto Rican group of 475,000 in that state decide to move to a majority over to the Democrats, well, then it's going to swing a state. I mean, honestly, it gets down to a very small amount. We don't know, whether Trump supporters are underrepresented in the polls, and therefore you get the surge at the last minute, versus women and Swifties on the other side who are also saying one thing to pollsters and their husbands and may vote in another way. It's a complete mugs game. What I will say is this: we're going to be into a dilemma for, a good couple of months, because as we're going to end up with the vote that takes place between the time that the polls close to midnight, when most of us would be sitting there and saying, honey, it's time to go to bed, we'll catch the results in the morning, and a declaration probably by the Republicans that they have won, because we're not over into California. Number two, by the time we wake up in the morning, that may have shifted a little bit, but then we're going to have the 120 lawsuits that are already being proffered in the legislative system in the United States activated, so that, there's a big challenge to, who won and who didn't win. So the next phase will be challenging the voters' records, challenging the voters' machines, everything that we saw the last time. The next phase will be the reckoning in the courts who decide whether it goes to the Supreme Court or not. And then the last reckoning will be in the final 2 weeks as we lead up to January 6th yet again, or 5th, or whatever day it is, to the ascension of power and who's going to actually take it. I listen to a number of pollsters that I really respect in the United States, Cliff Young from Ipsos probably being the most. And even there isn't anything for sure except the potential backlash to Canada, where there's a support among both political supporters for up to 20% tariffs on everything that we have going across the border. So I don't think anything's going to be solved on election night. I don't think any probability model is something I would even listen to, because there's some hidden, Easter eggs in all of this. But I got to tell you, I think we're in for a wild ride for about 2 months, and I would sure buckle up.
Yeah, Tim, I heard the phrase lawfare is what we're facing right now, and the number of it's not even the number of briefs that are being prepared to challenge certain things. There's already responses to the briefs, so we're so far down the road here on the integrity of the election already being called into question. I don't know how you get that back.
I guess you'll see what the margin ends up being, right? That's all very fair, and maybe we'll be 2 or 3 podcasts, and this will still be our last topic on each of those as an undecided. But look, if I asked, what would we wager if we needed to? Look, I think the issue matrix actually favors Republicans in the states around affordability, a bad immigration system, and crime, and they all move well on the Republican side. When I watch the closing arguments of the campaigns, it seems like Trump's is more consistent, and the Harris campaign about calling Trump the fascist or unstable, I think people have already made up their minds. I'm not sure how many votes that actually moves. And I think the central weakness of the Kamala Harris campaign is that there's 2 basic questions she didn't adequately address. How is she different from Joe Biden? And secondly, how does she reconcile her previous positions, which are on the left side of the spectrum, with a more mainstream approach? Our panelist Kathleen Wynne did an excellent job at not being Dalton McGuinty. As the opposition leader that was ahead in the polls, I saw that dwindling away as people said, okay, she's very different in the way she approaches issues and what she wants to do. Harris has failed to do so. So my prediction is a narrow landslide. I think it's a narrow polling result on total vote, but I think the electoral votes fall to Trump and he wins by a significant number.
The difference for you, Kathleen, is you weren't running for premier while Dalton McGuinty was still sitting in the premier's chair. Right. So that's slightly different. But to Tim's point, that is an important part of it. But if the votes are already baked in, again, I'm just kind of looking at this from afar, but the analysis suggests that if Harris has any advantage, it's her machinery to get the vote out. And if it's that close, the margins are that close, that door knocking, that get the vote out, get people to ride to the polling stations is really going to be critical. I mean, in the absence of Elon Musk's $1 million
van. Right. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing just makes my blood run cold. I just have a hard time imagining how the people of the United States would elect Donald Trump. And, to the point about the closing arguments, if you're Puerto Rican and you live in Pennsylvania and you listen to that comic at the rally, who was chosen by Trump's people, make that incredibly racist, horrible comment, I just don't know how you not vote for Kamala Harris. But I'll tell you guys, my son and my sister and I are going to be in Philadelphia this weekend. And so I'll report back to you next week. The election will be over, but I'll do a debrief on what it felt like. See what's happening. Yeah.
Well, and I think that really that sort of that ground game that, we talked a little earlier about Musk paying people to go out, and I would think it's a completely, Tim, a different dynamic rather than having passionate, committed volunteer. Here's $200 and go and knock on this many doors. I think the result slightly different, particularly at the messaging at the door.
Yeah, and look, you guys made excellent points. The Democrats had a very strong ground game. I suspect they'll bring a strong ground game, but political parties are very flexible. They're very adaptable. A tactic that one uses pops up in the campaign next time around for their opponents. So I got to think the Republicans spent the last 4 years building up their own muscle on the ground game.
Yeah, well, it'll be all good fun. So let's you guys make the popcorn, and we'll share it all next time we sit. So Kathleen Wynne, Tim Hudak, John Wright, and Keith Leslie, they are the front bench here on the Ledger Ontario Politics Podcast.